I want to say good morning and welcome to so many people who have joined this morning's call on national issues. I am going to give sort of a long introduction here because we have a lot of people on this call and the numbers are rapidly rising of people who are joining the call. So in order to give the people who are still working their way into the call, I'm just going to be the warm-up act here for just a moment. And that probably gives me the opportunity to say thank you to all who are on this call and welcome. It's great to have you with us. We are looking forward to a very engaging discussion about national issues that are very, very much in the news at this time. And it's just terrific that at the West Virginia Chamber of Commerce, we're able to be supported by the very, very good work of the United States Chamber of Commerce. The U.S. Chamber is a strong ally, a terrific partner, really our go-to organization for federal issues and international issues and so much more. And it's a really big deal to have Jack Howard with us this morning. Jack is the U.S. Chamber's Senior Vice President for Congressional and Public Affairs. He is a person who has a depth of experience on Capitol Hill, in Washington, and throughout the nation. Jack heads up a division at the U.S. Chamber that includes 15 lobbyists located in Washington. He also heads up 7 regional offices charged with providing membership services and grassroots lobbying on behalf of the U.S. business community. The Chamber of Commerce of the United States is our nation's foremost voice of business. We just couldn't be happier than to have the opportunity to hear from Jack about issues that will include reconciliation, infrastructure, the PRO Act, and so many other things. Jack is responsible for developing the strategy and leading the tactical execution of the Chamber's congressional lobbying activities. He coordinates resources in Washington and throughout the country and helps ensure that the U.S. Chamber's mission and objectives are met on Capitol Hill. He has a lengthy resume, a lengthy record of working in the White House as Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush. He worked in the Office of Legislative Affairs, where he coordinated the efforts of senior level White House officials, cabinet departments, and agencies to help ensure congressional passage of President Bush's legislative priorities. He also worked in the White House under President George H.W. Bush from 1989 to 1992, and in the Office of Legislative Affairs for the White House. But he also has extensive experience on Capitol Hill. He was senior counsel and advisor to members of the House and Senate, who included the speakers of the House, Hastert and Gingrich, as well as Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott. He's been recognized as one of the top 50 leaders in Washington for congressional affairs and one of the top 50 White House staff members by roll call. And he is regularly acknowledged as being one of the small handful of leading authorities in Washington on national affairs and the anticipated actions of Congress. So, Jack, it's wonderful to be able to welcome you. Thank you for joining us this morning. You have on this call a large number of not only West Virginia, but regional people from representing everything from small business to the financial world, to the professions, to some of our largest businesses. And we are looking forward to your remarks. Today's call, by the way, is being recorded and will be made available at a later time for those who want to come back and catch up on where we went today. And if you, as Jack is speaking, if you have questions, please let us know by either raising your hand or typing in your question. And Jack has agreed, depending on time, to be able to take some of your questions. So with that, Jack, I'm going to turn the program over to you. Lots to talk about. Last week was an enormously busy week in Washington, and for many of us as we worked on some issues of national priority. And if that's not a big enough warm up, I don't know what might be. So Jack, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We really, really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you for that very generous introduction. I often find, this is my 42nd year here in Washington, and I often find people describing my background, it kind of makes me a little dizzy, actually. It's like sitting here thinking, oh yeah, I remember when I did that. But in any event, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all. The feeling's more than mutual about the partnership that we have. And this morning's session couldn't be more timely. So I just really want to say thank you to you and to your members for your leadership and everything you've been doing to help us here in DC advance and protect our agenda. I really can't, in all sincerity, I can't think of a better, more productive working relationship than the one that we have with all of you on some of the most high profile, really pivotal issues important, not only to West Virginia, but the business community and all across America, really. I often say to people, at the chamber and around town, you all are really you're punching above your weight. And there's a lot riding on what your two senators and your congressional delegation do or don't do, not only over the next several months, but in the next several hours. Right? So we're dealing with some real-time, high-profile issues. And you ticked off three of them. The way I look at them, it's like juggling chainsaws. Each one of them is fraught with its own drama and risk. So we really have three issues bearing down on us, coming to a head here. And the best way I could kind of try to explain this or rationalize it in my own mind is to try to look at deadlines. What are the action forcing events that Congress has to deal with? And you can kind of work backwards from there to get a sense for what might happen or even what might not happen. So in backwards order, let's start with what the only real fixed deadline at this point that exists is December 3rd. That is when the current continuing resolution to keep the government open expires. As Steve alluded to last week, the Congress passed a CR. Fiscal year ended October 1st. So the top priority they had was just to keep the government open. They managed to do that until, like I said, December 3rd. So what happens between now and then? The next deadline, not as fixed as the government running out of money, is October 31st, Halloween, ironically. That is when the current extension of the Surface Transportation Bill, which is a much narrower version, excuse me, a narrower version of the big bipartisan bill, although it includes some elements of it. That's when that program expires. Last week, again, that was supposed to expire on October 1st. Congress passed an extension to October 31st. Okay, so again, between now and then, the Congress is going to have to figure out how to either extend that again, or if you listen to what Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership are saying, they want to have the larger, some version of the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill, the tax and spending spree that we've been focused on. They want to have a much narrower, slimmed down version of that ready to go before October 31st. I think that's kind of ambitious, but that's their plan. Along with that, what they want to do is try to pair that in some way with the Senate passed infrastructure bill. And I'm sure you all remember, you saw the drama last week that the Senate infrastructure bill, which, you know, to the credit of, well, both your senators, but particular Senator Capito, really got the ball rolling on that way back in January or February, when President Biden had just been sworn in. There was a group of Republican senators who went to President Biden and said, look, we want to work with you on a coronavirus relief bill. Unfortunately, he didn't take them up on their offer, and they decided to go ahead on a more partisan version of a reconciliation bill. There's a lot of disappointment, obviously, that they felt like they extended kind of the olive branch to work together on something in a bipartisan fashion. Okay, so that didn't work. To her credit, Senator Capito then kind of said, okay, let's put that behind us. Let's try to figure out a way to work on an infrastructure bill. Made a lot of progress, dealt with White House staff for, I think, about 2 months, negotiating a package. And in the end, President Biden just decided that he couldn't go along with that. But still, it was an important step forward. And the work that she put together in working with other senators and committees and things like that really formed the framework for what then Senators Portman and Sinema then kind of stepped in, took a lot of what she had worked on with her help and kind of fleshed it out, added some features, changed a few things. And that is the bill that eventually, with a lot of work, and thanks to you all, with obviously Senator Capito, Senator Manchin, that bill eventually passed the Senate in August. That was the bill that passed 69-30. Got 19 Republican senators. It would not have happened were it not for Senator Capito's leadership back in February, when there was a lot of skepticism and cynicism, really, about how serious President Biden was about trying to work together. So that takes us all the way up to August. It was a terrific victory. Like I said, 69 votes, 19 Republican senators. And then things really kind of got complicated, because then the next thing the Senate Democratic leadership did was to pass their version of the $3.5 trillion budget resolution, which is just the broad outline. It's a blueprint. It doesn't have all the details. So they managed to pass that through the Senate on a 51-50 vote, actually. Senator Manchin voted for that, but he made clear that he was not committed to the overall $3.5 trillion. So that was a good sign. The House then picked it up, muscled it through the House, convinced 10 Democratic, more moderate centrist senators or members of the House to vote for the bill in exchange for a commitment to vote on the Senate infrastructure bill last Monday, the 27th. Personally, that was a red flag for me, because anytime you leave a bill, particularly an infrastructure bill, which we all know is not purer than the driven snow, if you leave a bill like that sitting for 6 weeks, you're going to get a lot of people who are going to demagogue it and pick it apart. And really, it just makes it that much more difficult to sustain the momentum for six weeks. So that's what happened. By the time we got to last Monday, a variety of factors were coming into play. Took on, like I said, a lot of ill-informed attacks on it, and we were really struggling to get the votes, particularly on the Republican side. And I have to say, one of your members of the House, Mr. McKinley, was very helpful behind the scenes in trying to kind of move that forward as well. And I know you all back there in West Virginia played an instrumental role in helping him get to a good position on that. Now, unfortunately, for one reason or another, between Senate passage of the bill back in August, House goal of voting last Monday, the House Republican leadership also decided that they were going to not only oppose the bill, they were going to whip against it, meaning that we thought we had about 50 Republicans who were prepared to vote for the bill. And by the time they got finished whipping against it, we were down to less than 20, maybe 15. So that, as a result, we ended up coming up short. In the meantime, on the other side of the aisle, the House Progressive Caucus, which is the more left-wing, far-left members, which is quite a sizable contingent, roughly 100 Democrats, were also threatening to vote no on the Senate infrastructure bill because they wanted to vote on the reconciliation bill, the $3.5 trillion bill. So all these things come to a head. Ironically, the House Republican leadership had aligned themselves with the Progressive Caucus in urging members to vote. It's just one of those kind of unholy alliances. All right, so we get to Monday, the votes aren't there. So Speaker Pelosi convinces the Democratic moderates to put the vote off for 3 days and let's try to do it on Thursday, last Thursday. All right, no more progress between Monday and Thursday. Democratic or Republican leadership is really working hard against it at this point. But they still have this commitment to vote on Thursday. All right, well, Thursday comes, Thursday becomes Friday. And the next thing you know, President Biden's coming up here on Friday night and makes clear what we've been trying to avoid all the way along, that the two bills are linked, and one would not pass without the other, despite everybody's efforts to keep them unlinked from the concept of vote for the Senate infrastructure bill first, and then reconciliation will come up later. And unfortunately, from a strategic standpoint, that was a body blow to passage of the bill. So that's really where we are at this point. The next deadline that, like I said, that expires is the end of October. I don't think there's going to be a slimmed down version of a reconciliation bill ready to go by then. And so we're going to be in a situation again where, since Speaker Pelosi is committed to vote on the Senate infrastructure bill in October, what happens then? I suspect there's going to be another delay. People's heads will explode again. And then this whole thing will probably be put off until November or December. So the reconciliation bill, like I said, is no longer 3.5 trillion. That version, that number is dead. The policies, however, are still alive. And so the challenge among the President Biden, the White House, Senate Democratic leadership, House Democratic leadership is to try to squeeze as many of those policies that were in the $3.5 trillion bill into the 2.1 or 2.2 overall number that, frankly, Senator Manchin seems to be comfortable with. So that's really where the action is this week, and I suspect it'll go on for quite a while. The other deadline that's coming up is the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is currently expected to expire probably, they're thinking October 18th. Now, there's going to be a lot of drama today, this afternoon, as I alluded to earlier. The Senate Democrats are bringing a bill to the floor that will suspend the debt ceiling until December 2022. Senator McConnell and the Senate Republicans are going to block that. So then the question becomes, what happens after that? Because at that point, the Senate and the House have a week and a half to figure out some way to extend the debt ceiling. Otherwise, as we all know, the government defaults on its debt. So the complication here, as if we need more complications, is the House is currently out of session and is not coming back until October 19th, a day after the debt ceiling is supposed to expire. The Senate was scheduled to go on recess next week. So Schumer is saying, well, we'll have to extend that, obviously, to deal with the debt ceiling because the one on the floor today is going to expire. So I don't want to get too far into the technical parliamentary mishmash. Senator McConnell has been urging Senator Schumer for weeks to raise the debt ceiling using the reconciliation process, a separate reconciliation process from the broader reconciliation, the 3.5 process. So they can use a separate reconciliation process to raise the debt ceiling. The problem is that takes time. And as a result, Senator Schumer has been waiting until, frankly, today to force a vote on this. And so to get back to one of the other real things Senator Manchin in particular has been helpful on, there's talk about creating a carve out in the filibuster for to allow just the debt ceiling to pass with 50 votes. Our concern is we've been fighting to maintain the filibuster with Senator Manchin's help all year long. And if you start to chip away at the filibuster with a debt ceiling exception or other exceptions, for all intents and purposes, the filibuster is gone. That then plays into the situation on the PRO Act. We've been working really hard to try to make sure that we have enough senators who are willing to vote well, not only against the PRO Act, but also to maintain a filibuster, because we think we can kill the PRO Act on a filibuster. So it's a long way of saying there's lots of linkage between one thing or another, but the vote this afternoon on how they decide to handle the debt ceiling will have a direct impact on whether and how we can kill the PRO Act. So let me stop there. I know that's a lot of words. So I think in these kinds of things, I think it's easier for me just to try to answer questions, because frankly, at this point, I have more questions than I do answers. I know what's going to happen this afternoon. I don't know what's going to happen after that. But anyway, let me try to, that's kind of an overview of where things stand. So let me try to take some questions and maybe can clarify some of this.
Jack, this is Steve Roberts again for those who have tuned in, and thank you. I'll start by teeing up a couple of questions, and maybe if you don't mind, I'll combine a couple of questions into one. Sure. Because I think of obvious interest to us is what kind of message should we be sending to, in particular, Senator Manchin, because he is so pivotal in several of these discussions, but obviously to our entire delegation. We have wonderful relationships with Senator Capito and think the world of her. We have strong relationships with Congressman McKinley and Congressman Miller. And so we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to send the right message to them. And then I have a more complicated question, but I'll go ahead and put it on the table if it's okay, which is, if we get to the point that some reconciliation bill, I'm watching the pundits who are saying they believe that a reconciliation bill in some form is more likely to pass than not. Yeah. But if a reconciliation bill were to pass with a very narrow margin, coming up as close as we are to the 2022 general elections, if control of the House and Senate were to, I think if control of the House and Senate were to change, is it realistic to think to undo some of what we think would be the damage found in the reconciliation bill? So I'll stop with that. I apologize for combining several questions.
No, that's okay. I mean, that kind of touches on some important points. First of all, in terms of Senator Manchin, whatever you can do to, not that he needs shoring up, he's a pretty strong guy anyway, but just let him know that you back home have his back on saving the filibuster in particular, trying to get to a much smaller reconciliation bill, because I agree with your premise, eventually they'll get something. But then also just continue to insist on a separate vote on the infrastructure bill. The frustrating thing from our standpoint, a long list of frustrating things, is the Senate bill is ready to go. All they have to do is call it up for a vote. Now, the question is, can you actually get the votes? But to the extent that we can try to get, this is really more of a House problem, but to the extent that we can just get a vote on an infrastructure bill, we think we can win. So that's that would be kind of my priorities. Stay strong in a filibuster, because the filibuster involves a lot more than just, your tradition. It's a real kind of a bulwark against a lot of really bad legislation. So let him know he got his back home, and hang tough and get as good a deal as he can on reconciliation, because I think you're right. Some version is going to actually pass, but you kind of put your finger on sort of the strategic challenge. I think what's happening here, particularly with the White House and the Democratic leadership, they know odds are they're going to lose control of the House and probably the Senate next year. So they're going to try to get as many of the most popular items as they can inside of that 2.2 or $2.1 trillion bill, knowing full well, like on the child tax credit, for example, some of the more popular features. Yes, you can undo a lot when Republicans take control, but you still have a Democratic president. And so it's going to be tough politically for Republicans, when they take control, to be able to undo a lot of those more popular features. So Again, and frankly, the longer this drags out, the harder it is for Democrats to pass a reconciliation bill like that, because obviously with each passing day, the election looms larger and larger. So that's really kind of the dynamic right there.
And we have several questions in the queue. Brian Dayton is going to manage those questions for us. So Brian, I'm going to ask you to bring those questions on.
Sure. Jack, our first question, the question is, I've heard discussion that supporters of the reconciliation bill, in an effort to gain Senator Manchin's support, may seek to reduce the cost by reducing the number of years the bill was funded.
Right.
How can we understand the true cost of any such proposals, and what's the best source to understand those costs?
Yeah, no, I think that kind of dovetails with Steve's question, because I think that's one of the things they're going to try to do, is the reconciliation bill, technically goes for 10 years. But one of the ways to meet that $2.2 trillion target is to say, okay, it's only going to go for 3 or 4 years or 5 years. So I think you're going to see a lot of kind of bookkeeping chicanery, really, in order to try to meet that target, which then, comes back to, Steve's point. That makes it all the more important for us to be able to put pressure on, particularly Senator Manchin and some of the more centrist members of the House to try to get that bill down to around $1 trillion, maybe, because they're still talking. I mean, going from 3.5 to 2.2 trillion is portrayed as being a compromise. It's still $2.2 trillion, right? That's a lot of money. And so the more we can kind of shrink that window from 2 down to, Manchin started at 1.5, but they're putting a lot of pressure on him to go upward. The more we can put pressure on him to go back down, I think the more successful we'll be.
Thank you. The next question we had is that many perceive Senator Manchin as trying to restore bipartisanship in the Senate. Is bipartisanship a dead letter, or does he have an opportunity here to succeed? What are your thoughts?
I think he does have an opportunity to succeed, and I think he's been successful to this point. But I think you're right. I mean, that goes back to the infrastructure is traditionally a very bipartisan bill anyway. And just look how hard it's got, right? It's really kind of fallen into the grips of the the far left and the far right. And if we can't get a bipartisan infrastructure bill done, that's a very troubling precedent going forward. You're right about Senator Manchin, and there's nothing nothing that West Virginia chamber could do. What we've been trying to do is recruit other allies for Senator Manchin, right? So we've been working very closely with Senator Sinema, who is a force of nature of her own, but also to try to encourage other more moderate Democratic senators to kind of be more public. And so it's not just a question of what Senator Manchin will agree to or not agree to. I mean, I think that's just too much weight to bear for him. And I'm sure he would appreciate a few more recruits. But like, for example, on the filibuster, he's the most visible opponent. So is Senator Sinema, but we know there are 6 or 7 senators who also have concerns, but they don't want to go public for fear they're going to get their heads handed to them, back home. And so that's really kind of the challenge, is how do we broaden sort of that centrist group of senators and particularly House members and give them more cover? Because in the end, the 10 Democrats I referred to earlier, they had to cave because they were just getting too much pressure from their own leadership. We need more than 10, right? There's safety in numbers.
Jack,
go ahead, Steve. Sorry,
Brian, if I may, I've just got another question on the tip of my tongue, so let me roll with it, if I may. And Jack, this is now I'm getting into the realm of the highly speculative, but thinking about potential allies for Senator Manchin. When I look east of us and to Virginia and think about Senators Kaine and Warner. Yeah. And then I think about the Virginia election coming up.
Yep.
I wonder if, if Virginia were to have an election in which Republicans fared rather well,
yeah.
if any of that would motivate the members of the Senate, who I think are really pretty friendly with Senator Manchin. I mean, he has a wonderful way of making friends on both sides of the aisle. But I wonder if any of that, because I would think that perhaps in Virginia, we could find a senator or senators who might be willing to have Senator Manchin's back on some of this.
Yeah, your thinking is exactly the same as mine, Steve. Let's say, for example, the Virginia governorship goes Republican, Youngkin gets elected. You may be in a situation where Senator Warner and Kaine, who we have really good working relationships. In fact, we have somebody on our staff who used to work for Senator Warner. So if we get to that point, yeah, I mean, they may look around and say, hey, the ground is shifting beneath my feet. Maybe I need to be a little bit more visible, public, in trying to help Senator Manchin. But we deal behind the scenes quite a bit with Mark Warner on things. So, and he and Suzanne, frankly, have a good relationship. We don't do as much with Senator Kaine. We need to do more there. But I think that is one, window of opportunity that we're looking at too.
Ryan,
same thing maybe on the House side too.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be very interesting.
Jack, I had a question for you, and it kind of ties in. You may have answered it somewhat. So, now that the House sent over the $3.5 trillion, which is essentially dead in the Senate with how it's going to change, we've seen 40 to 50 progressive Democrats sort of stall the infrastructure bill or block it. Yeah. What power do those 10 moderate Democrats who wanted the bipartisan infrastructure bill in the House, what power do they have, and do you think they'll use it?
Not enough. I mean, that's why I say we need a broader group than just 10. And I don't think, I'm skeptical, right? I think what we saw last week, they don't really have much leverage within the Democratic caucus because they're outnumbered, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, and they're not as loud and, strident as kind of the far left is, because the far left members, because they get a lot of support from their interest groups on Twitter, social media, whereas the ones that are willing to kind of break with their party, they get killed, which is why we're also trying to give them as much cover back home as well, not only on the infrastructure bill, but to hold out on reconciliation. But it's hard. I mean, you're asking them to go up against not only their Democratic leadership and Nancy Pelosi in particular, but also, President Biden. And that's really what happened on Friday night when President Biden made a lot of drama about coming to the House Democratic Caucus meeting and essentially threw the moderates under the bus and aligned himself with the far left. But again, we need more. It's like on the Senate side, we need more than just those 10 guys who are willing to stick their necks out.
We do have another question in the queue right now. Before I ask it, I just want to remind everybody that if you do have a question, you can raise your hand and ask it verbally, or you can type into the Q&A box. The next question we have is actually from the chairman of the West Virginia Chamber, and it is, what major revenue raisers do you think are likely to survive in the reconciliation and those that may not be as likely to survive?
Yeah, it's hard to tell what might not survive because they can play a lot of games again on kind of the accounting in terms of what actually survive, what gets included or not. I do think, though, the ones that are likely to survive are probably some version of an increase in the corporate rate. I have a feeling the center of gravity is somewhere around 25%. And that's going to be a difficult thing to fight against, which is why part of our strategy too has been to kill the entire bill, not just the tax provision, particularly for a state like West Virginia. There's a lot of bad other provisions in there that don't get as much attention as some of the tax provisions or some of the other high profile provisions, like on mining. Domestic mining really makes it much more difficult for businesses to mine coal and things like that. Those types of things don't get as much attention, but there's plenty of other reasons to vote against this reconciliation bill, well beyond just the tax provisions, which is why, again, we're trying to shift the focus away from the taxes because, look, let's be honest, raising the corporate rate from 20% or 21% to 5% doesn't give Democrats as much heartburn as it does Republicans, right? There's some of the other things in that bill that they're particularly vulnerable on.
Jack, my next, I'm trying to think whether I have a question or a comment, and I'm trying to come up with where's the question, but let me go ahead and make the comment and then see if it lends itself to further discussion or turns into a question. And that is this. With regard to the infrastructure bill, of course, we became rather familiar with what was in that and what is in that piece of legislation potentially for West Virginia, which includes at least $4.4 billion in new spending for our state. And to put that into perspective for those of you who are tuning into this call, that is the size of our general revenue budget. So to be able to spend that much money on broadband, roads and highways, bridges, airports, which, one of the key things that we've identified as necessary for West Virginia's economic growth is good transportation at all levels, but we can't do it without strong airports and good air service. And so, we look at that as, wow, that's a big number. It's a number big enough to potentially solve our broadband and connectivity issues, which have been identified by chamber members as one of our top three problems that we need to solve in West Virginia. So I guess to try to turn this into a question, can we keep our fingers crossed that the House will want to come back to this topic? I know you've largely answered that question, but what can we continue to do to be persuasive to our members of the House who are all Republicans to see what is in this for West Virginia that is really maybe a once in a generation opportunity to solve these problems? And the corollary, and here's where I sort of was heading. It's surprising to me that the media has not covered this issue more. I guess it's not the saying, if it bleeds, it leads, and maybe there's not enough angst or controversy or bloodshed here, regrettably. I hate to frame it that way. Yeah. A little bit of frustration, I guess you're hearing on my part, that we've had a little bit of difficulty getting the media to focus on the enormous problem-solving capability for West Virginia and the infrastructure bill. Yeah. I'll stop there.
No, that's okay. No, you're right in terms of your fingers crossed, and you put one of those fingers right on the central kind of what I think is the central strategic challenge we have here. As I said, I was very concerned when they put the vote off. Instead of the House just picking the bill up after the Senate passed it and just passing it, which they could have done because they brought members back early at the end of August. By putting it off, it just lent itself, as I said earlier, to distortions, inaccuracies, demagoguery about what's in the bill, what's not in the bill. And it's just sitting out there, right? And so we're still in that kind of situation where it's going to sit for at least the next several weeks. And from our standpoint, what we're trying to do is what you just indicated, was to stay out of the national uproar over the debt ceiling and reconciliation and what's the right number and what's inside the number and who's winning and all of that kind of, stratospheric arguments, and drill down on what the benefits of the infrastructure bill are to members back home, right? Just tangible evidence that those bridges, those roads, what we're trying to do is put members in a position of, look, we get, you're concerned about reconciliation. We understand all that, but this bill is too important to let get away from us, because it means this airport that is, falling down around us is an embarrassment, will get significant improvement. Broadband, same thing, particularly for more rural members. Translate the kind of the broad concepts of this bill into real tangible benefits back home and make members explain, okay, why are you voting against this thing that will, improve the highway, improve that bridge or whatever, and just say to them, look, this bill is too important to our communities, to our businesses, to our economy to vote no. But that's exactly the dynamic that we need help with. And I know you guys are doing it. That's why you were able to get, Mr. McKinley, right? But we need to keep our foot on that pedal, particularly, like I said, it's kind of unusual for a bill like this to sit there for 4 or 5 months, and it just gets picked apart by, the right-wing media, the left-wing media. And so it is a very challenging, and as you said, very frustrating, because they should weigh the bill on its merits, right? But it's an uphill battle.
We have another question that just came into the queue, actually, and now 2 more. The first one is, the president and Democratic leadership, this is shifting back to reconciliation, say that the tax increases contained in reconciliation pay for it completely. The person commenting said, I believe the Washington Post gave this claim 2 Pinocchios. How many would you give it?
2 is probably being generous. I mean, but that goes back to my point about how they're going to shrink the size of this thing, right? You can play all kinds of games that make it look on the surface like, oh yeah, great, add this, that, and the other thing, and oh, look at that, presto, it doesn't cost anything, or it's 2 trillion. So I don't really put a whole lot of stock in that. I mean, you get into those kinds of analysis, there's always somebody who, somebody's got one study saying one thing, and you'll find 3 studies saying something different, and then 4 more studies. So I don't, like I said, Washington Post is probably being a little generous, but what's the old saying where you got lies, damn lies, and statistics? That's kind of the way I look at it.
The next question we had comes in, and you touched on this a little bit earlier. It's asking just about the U.S. Chamber, running ads on these various issues. And I know you had mentioned earlier, I think the U.S. Chamber is giving ads in support of the more moderate Democrats in holding the line. Was that correct, or can you give a little bit more?
Yeah, we're running not only ads, but we're also putting billboards up, like I think right outside of their district offices, thanking them for hanging tough, like Stephanie Murphy and some of the other, kind of what they call blue dog Democrats. We're not doing a lot of it. We're not trying to boil the ocean here. We're really focused on kind of that group of, like we know there are 10, there's another 10 or so who, left to their own devices, would vote no, but they're not being left to their own device. But anyway, yeah, we're also, I mean, it's a carrots and stick kind of thing. We're trying to give cover to people who are with us, and by the same token, if we need to apply the stick, we'll do that too.
Sure. We have another question's come in, and it actually just made me think of another saying. A million here, a million there. You're now talking about real money. We're now talking about $1 billion here or $1 trillion here.
Yeah, $1 trillion. Right.
The next question is anyone in Congress ever going to deal with trying to balance the budget, or has that ship sailed?
Mitt Romney is, but that ship is sailing over the horizon. I don't know what it's going to take, frankly, for people to focus on the fact that we're, $30 trillion in debt and climbing fast. I mean, what they add to the debt just in the last 2 years, that's $6 or $7 trillion. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And it is the kind of thing, frankly, it starts to grow exponentially, right? But yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I don't really see anybody with the political courage to do that. There was some thought. This is really speculative. Go back to Steve's points about reorder. There's some thought that, in conjunction with the debt ceiling, what is Mitch McConnell holding out for, right? So far, he's just saying, we're going to vote no until you do it in reconciliation. We'll see where that, but at some point, and I don't think we're close to this point yet, McConnell's going to kind of come forward and say, okay, in exchange for voting for the debt ceiling, here's what I want. And in the past, it's been some sort of fiscal restraint kind of thing. So, I mean, maybe it's a glimmer of hope, but we'll see.
Jack, I know how busy you are. Again, for all of our participants, it's a great honor to have you, the Senior Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for Congressional and Public Affairs. You, the U.S. Chamber, leading advocates speaking for business, what I like to characterize as the sane middle in Washington. And we couldn't be more pleased than to have had you, or more honored. We know how extremely busy you are. And I just want to say once again, thank you for a program that went a little bit longer than I thought it would because of so many questions in the queue. And I think that's a demonstration of the level of interest in these topics and the level of engagement of the members of the West Virginia Chamber.
Yeah, no, I cleared my schedule. I figured it would go long, but it was also it was time well spent. And the way I look at it is very kind of, transactional. Yeah, I mean, we carry a lot of weight here in Washington, but really the secret to our success is what you all do back home, because members of Congress, they know full well I can't vote for them, right? We can't vote for them. Some of us live in Washington. Some people live in DC itself. They can't vote for anybody. But at the end of the day, you all vote for them, right? So that, trumps whatever arguments we're making here in DC and amplifies it, frankly. If they know that what we're telling them in terms of what, things we want them to vote for or against is being reinforced by what they're hearing from their constituents who can vote for them, I mean, that's what gets their attention.
Well, Jack, I've even had some text messages complimenting you and the very, very in-depth presentation you have made. And a couple have said, how do I reach him? Because I want to send him a thank you note. So I think that gives you some idea of the kind of reception you're receiving here.
I'm happy to do that. And I was going to close by saying, let's keep the lines of communication open. I'm happy to do more of these types of formal things, or if people want to give me a call or shoot me an email, happy to tell you what I know and what I don't know.
Well, and we look forward when your time allows to welcoming you back to West Virginia. You've been very gracious with your time in the past, and we would look forward to inviting you back. So
likewise.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you to all participants. Thank you greatly.
You bet.
Take care all. Take care. Stay well.